You're listening to the Born to Kick Arse podcast with Matt Tomasi and can be found at borntokickarse.com/episode 16.
Welcome to the Born to Kick Arse podcast, where you're introduced to the most fascinating people on the planet. Learn the ingredients of greatness that you can apply to your life. And now your host, Matthew Tomasi.
Today's podcast is brought to you by audible.com. Get a free audiobook of your choice and a 30-day free trial by visiting borntokickarse.com/audible. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle or MP3 player. To download your free audiobook today, go to borntokickarse.com/audible. Again, that's borntokickarse.com/audible for your free audiobook. Do you know someone or know of someone who walks the walk and would like to hear them on the Born to Kick Arse podcast? They can be from any field, but they need to have an inspiring story that will help to motivate others to achieve their own goals. If you do, please head over to borntokickarse.com/suggest a guest and fill out the form. We'd love to hear from you. Elise Downing is attempting to run 5,000 miles around the coast of Great Britain. I catch up with her 3,000 miles and 6.5 months into her mammoth adventure. Elise shares some stories about her adventure so far, her struggles, her mindset and motivations, as well as her fuel of choice, cake. Enjoy the interview. Hi Elise, it's Matt here and welcome to the Born to Kick Arse podcast.
Hi there, thanks for having me.
Now, some people do a lap of, the oval or a lap around the block. I believe you are doing a lap of Great Britain. Is that true?
Yes, it is true. And it does always make me laugh when people call it a lap because I never really thought of that before, but it is a lap of Great Britain.
How did you get into this? Why did you want to do this massive adventure?
So basically it was just over a year ago now. It was March 2015 and I was working for a food startup in London and we sort of delivered things across the country. So I was looking at the map one day and it just kind of sprung into my mind, I wonder if anyone's ever sort of been around the coast of the UK before. And I started Googling it. And people have walked it quite a lot and people have cycled it, but no one had really ran it, which wasn't particularly why I wanted to do it. It was never going to be a first and it isn't. But it just really appealed to me because I think I'd always really liked the idea of doing a big physical adventure. And there's just so much to explore in the UK. And I was like, all this is on kind of in my back garden, on my home turf that I've never explored. So I think the idea just really appealed to me. So I thought about it for a while and I thought, well, maybe I'll do that in 2018, 2019. And it was actually a friend at the time who said, well, why are you waiting that long? Like, can you save up the money? Like, can you leave earlier? And I thought, well, yes, I probably can. So then on November the 1st, I actually set off.
Prior to that, I guess growing up, were you fairly active? Were you a runner at all growing up?
Not at all. So my brother's really sporty. He is definitely a runner. And he said to me the other day that he still couldn't quite believe that I was doing this because I just was not interested. I was a pretty lazy child. I liked sitting down. Like my family are all quite outdoorsy. So we did outdoorsy things, but I was not sporty at all. And I started running in 2013 as a bit of a New Year's resolution. I decided I wanted to do a half marathon, mostly just to get a bit fitter really. But no, it's definitely, I've not been running my whole life at all.
So you did like some smaller stuff like a half marathon and then you just thought, stuff it, I'm going to do a lap of Great Britain.
Yeah, it's funny really because, it was early 2013. It was January 1st, New Year's Day. And I decided I'm going to run a half marathon this year. So I started running And I started really enjoying it. And I was actually living in Sweden at the time, studying abroad. So it was beautiful, very cold, snowing all the time, -20. But that's when my running career began. So over the next kind of 2 or 3 years, I did a couple of half marathons, and I actually did a marathon. It was a complete disaster. I was dressed as a crayon and it was horrible. But I just really enjoyed being outdoors and running. And so when the idea to go around the UK came to mind, it wasn't necessarily that I wanted to do a running adventure. I just wanted to do the adventure. And I didn't really want to walk it. I didn't really like walking. And at the time, I hadn't cycled anywhere and I didn't have a bike. So I thought, well, maybe I could run it. So that's kind of how it all came about.
Now, did you say you ran in as a crayon?
Oh gosh, it was horrible. So it was 2014 and it was my final year at university and I was going to trek to Everest Base Camp that summer. But we were doing it as a charity trip. So I decided to do a marathon as a bit of a fundraiser and also just to get a bit fitter and sort of do some more training. So I decided to dress it as a crayon, a Crayola purple crayon. And I convinced my dad to do it with me and he dressed as a fairy. And it was a terrible case of planning. The marathon was 2 days after I finished university, so I hadn't really slept, been quite stressed for a few months. I hadn't trained properly, and I was in this crayon costume. It was a really hot day, and I think I cried for about 9 miles, and it was not fun.
And how did you pull up after your first marathon? Were your legs just smashed up?
Oh my gosh, I felt really terrible. I mean, it was my own fault. I didn't train properly, but I couldn't walk. I felt horrendous, which is why, because people often say to me, oh, I couldn't do what you're doing because I ran a marathon and I could never get up and do one the next day. But I think it's such a big difference because I'm sure we'll go into it a bit more later, but when I'm running, I have the whole day and I'm taking it very easy and eating a lot and sort of really not pushing it too hard. Whereas when you run a marathon, you're obviously trying to run quite fast and it does destroy you a bit. And if you told me after that first marathon that there'll be 2 years later, I'd be running sort of that distance multiple days, I would not have believed you.
Now, when you thought to yourself or actually committed mentally that I'm going to do this adventure, how long was it between that moment and when you commenced on the first day? What was the time frame leading up to starting off your run?
So I think it was about 7 months, I think. Yeah, it was the end of February last year when I first started thinking about it. And then it was late March, early April when I committed and I told my boss and I told my friends and family. And then November 1st that I set off. So, yeah, kind of 7 months or thereabouts.
So 7 months of planning. And were you doing much training leading up to that?
I have to admit, and I wouldn't advise this as a way to go about a huge adventure, but my planning and training were reasonably minimal, which looking back, I actually don't think was a terrible idea because my thinking, I was running regularly over the summer. I wasn't just sitting down doing nothing, but my thinking was because it's such a long adventure, I was always planning to kind of train a bit and take it easy over the first few weeks or months of the actual adventure. Whereas when you're doing something a bit shorter, for instance, if you're doing just a 1 day or even a week event, you need to really hit the ground running. Whereas I always thought I could probably afford to just run a bit less at the beginning. So that was always the plan. And because it's the UK and it's the coast, the route's pretty simple. You just follow the coast. So there wasn't a huge amount of planning involved. It was more just kind of getting my head around what I was actually going to go and try and do.
And how old are you?
I'm 24.
And what were your parents thinking when you said to them, I want to run around Great Britain?
I don't know. I think my dad's really, he's here at the moment. He's come to visit once a month, every month I've been doing it because he just really likes the outdoors and running. So he was just really excited, I think. My mum also, my whole family of runners, I was the only one who didn't start until a couple of years ago. So I think they were excited. And I think because it is in the UK, I guess that makes it seem a bit less scary to them than if I was on the other side of the world doing it. And I think that's quite nice as well because I have had a lot of friends and family come and visit and get involved, which is really nice rather than just being completely removed and sort of just looking at it on the internet.
And are you based normally, prior to starting the run, were you sort of based in London?
Yeah, so my family are from Northampton, which is the Midlands, but I've been living in London for the past year or so.
Okay. And if you can maybe take us back to the, day one, you started the run in London?
Yes, so I started in Greenwich, mostly because I didn't really know where to start, to be honest. Like I just said, my family are from the very middle of the country, so there wasn't really anywhere on the coast that I really had any attachment to. But I thought, but if you don't start in London, you kind of have at some point the issue of actually crossing the River Thames. So I thought I would just start in London and then I could finish back in London as well, and that would be easiest. So yeah, I started in Greenwich and about 20 people came along for the first day to see me off and run with me, which was really nice.
You're going clockwise?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then from London, where did you sort of head? Did you just sort of head east, or where was your main sort of destination, to go from London to the coast?
So the plan was to go out along the Thames until I hit the Kent coast. So the destination at the end of day one was Dartford, which is 17 miles from where I started in Greenwich in London. So that was the plan, and we followed the Thames. There's the Thames path, which is really easy to follow. So we followed that most of the way and then kind of cut up towards Dartford because there's a river you have to go up.
The route that you're taking, is it on road or is it trail or a path or sort of both?
It's a real mixture. So I've been quite lucky that the southwest coast path, which runs from Dorset through to Somerset in the southwest corner of England, and then the Wales coast path are both almost all trail, and they're really well signposted and waymarked. So I followed both of those almost in their entirety. So that was amazing, and I much prefer running on trail. You get amazing views, and they were real highlights. But now I'm in Scotland now, so coming up the northwest coast, that's been a lot more following country roads. But it makes a bit of a nice mixture, to be honest, because the trails are amazing, but they are really tough, they're hard going, whereas the roads are much easier to run on. So I've actually quite enjoyed having a bit of a mixture, and doing each one makes me appreciate the other, I think.
Now, you said you started off 1st of November, and
Yeah.
that's sort of leading into winter in
Yes.
the UK. How was that?
It was very wet and very windy. It was because people often ask, why did I start at that point? And it wasn't completely stupid. It was intentional. My thinking was I've estimated that the journey will take 10 months, and I'm just about on track for that. So it was always going to involve, being the best part of the year, some horrible weather. And the only way to avoid the very worst months was to wait until sort of March to start. And I just didn't really want to wait another 5 months, mostly because I think I would have chickened out if I'd had to wait too much longer. And the plan was always to start in London and run the south coast over the winter, where it's obviously a lot milder, rather than being in the north coast and the Highlands in the winter. But it was quite a mild winter, but it was exceptionally wet and windy, which on the coast paths was difficult because you're just being blown everywhere.
And what does your day look like normally? What time can you maybe give us an idea of what your routine is sort of day to day?
Yeah, so it kind of changes quite a lot depending on where I am and what I'm doing, and how far I've got to run. And it's also changed as the year's gone on because, for instance, in the winter, it was dark at 4 o'clock every night, and being on the coast path in the dark is not a good idea. So I was starting quite early then, probably sort of by about 8 o'clock in the morning most days, and running through the day because the terrain was very difficult and it was very, very slow going. Now that I've got a bit more light, because it's light until about 8 o'clock at 9 o'clock in the evenings now, I still try and get going reasonably early, so about 8 or 9. So I get up, I have some breakfast, I sort of sit around, do a bit of admin, answer some emails, not very exciting. And then about 8 or 9, I start running, and then I run through the day. I try and split it up into sort of 2 chunks. So I like to run about 2/3 of the day's distance, then have a rest for sort of half an hour or an hour, have something to eat, and just recuperate a bit. Then run the last third of the day. And then it really depends where I'm going, where I'm staying. But then wherever I get to, either kind of, if I'm staying with people, chat to my hosts, whoever I'm staying with, pitch my tent, explore the local area if there's something to explore. So it really differs day to day, which is what I quite like, actually.
Now, I just want to maybe touch on your gear.
Yeah.
Your backpack, how heavy is that, and what's your gear? What sort of stuff do you have in your backpack?
So I have a confession. I haven't actually weighed my backpack. My thinking was, I think I've got it as light as I could have it. So I just didn't need to know how heavy it was. It feels quite heavy. It's not my favourite thing running with it. So I'm going with ignorance is bliss on that front. But all I've got in it is I'm running with an Osprey backpack, and I've got a really lightweight tent, which a friend lent me, which was good because they're quite expensive. And I've got a lightweight sleeping bag, a Thermarest lightweight roll mat, and then I have 2 sets of clothes. So I've got my running clothes, which are always a bit dirty, and then I've got a clean set of clothes for the evening. And then I've got a book, a running watch, my glasses, and that's about it.
And what about like any sort of navigational? Do you have like a GPS, or did you just use your phone?
I'm just using my phone. I've got the OS Maps app. So what I tend to do is load the maps, and then you can put your phone on airplane mode to save battery, and I use those through the day. Like I said, there were some quite big sections. So the South West Coast Path is 630 miles and the Wales Coast Path is 870 miles, I think. And for each of those, I just followed the signpost the whole way. So it's there's a lot of really well waymarked trails in the UK which don't require too much navigation, which again is kind of the reason I chose this route, because navigation isn't something I'm particularly experienced in. So it's nice to be able to do the challenge without worrying too much about that side of things.
And what do you do or how do you plan for, because I remember reading, I think on your website or on your Facebook page, I think for the first few months, like you had your tent, but you were planning to possibly camp in your tent at night, but did you not do that for the first few months? Did you not use your tent at all?
Yeah, so basically when I was planning it, sort of this time last year, I imagined that I'd be camping almost the whole time, the whole way, just because I knew that to be able to afford to stay in a B&B or wherever every night, I would have to save up for another year or so. So I thought I was going to try and do it quite on a budget. So I set off and I thought I'd be using my tent. But what I actually found over the winter is that I've just met so many incredibly kind people. So I've stayed with a lot of families, and people have got in touch from my blog and my Facebook page. And especially over the winter when it was off season and it was quite quiet, some kind of hotels and small guest houses really helped me out and let me have a bed for the night if they had one. So I actually, for the winter, I didn't camp at all, and now I'm camping and it's really exciting. I'm really enjoying being outdoors. But I think because it was just so wet and windy and nothing would have dried. So I'm very grateful that I got some warm beds over the wet months.
Yeah, with your planning, how do you plan, or how do you go about planning, the next sort of day or two? Do you have a set routine or an approach to how you're going to tackle the next couple of days?
So what I generally do is every couple of weeks or month or so, I sit down with the maps and I try and work out a rough plan as to where I'm going to be over the next couple of weeks or a month. And then what I work out probably every 2 to 3 days is I try and work out a bit more exactly for the next 2 or 3 days. So that might be reaching out to people who have really kindly offered that I can stay with them, or looking to see if there's any campsites or just whatever's around. And then for me, it works really well to actually have a set schedule for a few days, because it means that if I'm really tired and I really want to stop running, I think, well, I've just got to get to this place. Whereas I think if I was just completely doing whatever I wanted and I could just throw my tent up anywhere, I would probably end up just giving up, like sort of stopping earlier in a day. So it works well for me to have somewhere to shoot for.
Do people actually reach out to you like via Twitter or Facebook, just sort of random people that are following your adventure? Is that how they sort of reach out to you that way?
Yeah, so I mean, it's not something I expected at all, but before I set off, people sort of said to me, you'll meet so many lovely people. And I thought, well, I'm sure I'll meet some nice people. But yeah, I think because I have been sharing my journey quite a lot on Facebook and Twitter, quite a lot of people who live around the coast have sort of got in touch to ask if they can help or offer their spare room and stuff, which is really kind of them and has really made the experience, to be honest, because it's those times when you meet someone amazing. Everyone's got such an amazing story to tell, and that's what's really made the trip for me, rather than just every night shivering in my tent on my own. So I've been so grateful, and it's been really interesting.
And have there been many people that have actually joined you and done some running with you?
Yeah, quite a lot of people have come to run with me, which has been amazing. What I've actually found is, because before I started, I kind of openly put out there that I'd love to have people join me, which is still very much true. But I think I underestimated how difficult that can be to organise logistically. So that's something I've learned as I've gone along, because obviously a lot of people, they're working, it's in the middle of the week, and they need a bit more warning, and I'm finding it really hard to give people warning. So that's definitely something I've learned on this journey, that it's hard to organise.
Do you have what do you do for batteries for your electronic equipment? Do you just sort of charge your gear at night, or do you have a solar powered device that you can charge stuff on the go?
So I do have a solar panel pack that charges a kind of a battery pack. I'm not really sure how it works, but and that's really helpful. And especially at the moment, I'm soon to be heading into Scottish Highlands, where everything's about to get a lot more remote. So I imagine I'll be using that a lot more. At the moment, I mostly just charge my phone kind of when I am in places. And if I stop in the middle of the day in a cafe, for instance, you can always use their plug points. So I've mostly just been actually charging stuff in places, but I do have a solar pack as well.
Now, what about eating and drinking on during the day when you're running? Do you carry do you have a bladder, or do you have water bottles, or sort of handheld bottles that you run with, or how do you carry your water or your fluids as well as your food?
So this is something that's definitely been a bit of a case of trial and error over the past few months. But what I found works really well for me is I just have water bottles. I don't have a water bladder. The reason for that is because obviously I'm quite low on space, and I've got my backpack, and it would just be really annoying trying to get a water bladder in and out of my quite full backpack. So I have just water bottles, and I generally go for a bit of a routine. It works quite well. Is I run for half an hour, and then I stop and have some water. Then I run for another half an hour, and then I stop and have some water and a snack. And then I do that the whole day. So that seems to work quite well, and I remain hydrated. My backpack has little waste pockets. So in them, I always have some snacks, like some nuts or just some jelly sweets. And then I kind of snack on those constantly. What I found is it's just so important to carry on eating, even if you don't feel hungry at first, because it really avoids hitting that crash. And I find it means I can go a lot longer and feel a lot better.
Now, you're burning through heaps of calories day in, day out for months. Do you have a particular approach to what you eat, or you just go for anything and everything?
So I have to say I'm not being too scientific about it. I'm trying to eat reasonably healthily as much as possible. So still keeping up eating fruits and vegetables. And like I said, I have some nuts and seeds and things that I snack on, rather than just eating rubbish all the time. But I think your body, you sort of crave what you need. So I don't love really unhealthy food anyway, but it's a bit of a running joke on all my social media channels that I am eating a lot of cake. So I think I'm trying to eat healthily, but also just, like you say, it's just getting enough calories in, really. So if what I really fancy is something that isn't that healthy, I think it's probably better to just eat it and have enough calories. So a bit of a mixture, to be honest. So I think it's just about balance, like it's generally just trying to be healthy. So,
you're going around the whole of Great Britain, you could try a whole heap of different cakes, couldn't you? From the south all the way through Wales.
And I pretty much have.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing as well, because for me, as much as it is a running journey, it is about exploring the UK. And so if that's trying all the different local foods, I don't want to be sticking to a really strict nutrition plan and then I can't try something delicious, or especially staying with people, I don't want to be really fussy and say I can't eat that. So I think just trying to be quite flexible. And it's it's difficult to get hold of things. I don't want to be carrying a whole bag full of food, because there's always shops and stuff. So just being quite flexible, I think, is the key.
you're sort of halfway, I'm thinking, or a bit over halfway.
Just over halfway, I think. So I think I'm coming up to 3,000 miles now.
How has the terrain and the environment changed? Has that been like an incredible thing to witness, starting off just heading into winter and then sort of seeing the season change, from the short daylight hours to the longer daylight hours and, going through towns, and how's that experience been for you?
That's actually been an unexpected highlight and I think I'm realising as I go through the seasons how little I've ever paid attention to these changes before. So I really notice now if it's light for a few more minutes, or at the moment all the wildflowers are out, so there's all the bluebells and the cornfields, and it is changing. And I think and from winter into spring, that's really noticeable. And yeah, it's been a real highlight. And also as you go around the country, so sort of in Devon and Cornwall, you have all these staggering cliffs, and then you come out to sort of Lancashire and Cumbria, and you've got lots of really lovely rivers, and it's been a real highlight to see how everything changes and the country changes. And I'm also almost a bit ashamed of how little I've ever been aware of that before.
Yeah, no, that would be quite incredible to see.
Yeah.
Even the position of the sun, like real subtle things, like the position of the sun at that certain time of the year, and then as you progress through the months, seeing that change, and I think you've done it quite well. Doing the hard yards early, hitting winter, commencing at the start of winter, and then now that spring, it's spring over there now. Is that right?
Yeah, it's spring.
So yeah, that'd be really good. Seeing all the vegetation and all the flowers and trees and all that coming out. That'd be pretty good.
Yeah, definitely. And I sort of feel like as well, because over the winter I was on the Southwest Coast Path, which is Devon, Cornwall, Dorset, Somerset, and that is a really tough trail. It is extremely hilly. The elevation up and down is crazy, and because it was so wet and windy, it was very slippy, and it was really hard going, as well as it being winter and short daylight hours. So having got that over with first, now I sort of feel like I can kind of relax, and I'm just enjoying it so much more because the sun's out and the train's easier. And so I think it was good to do that first of all and almost get the hardest bit over with.
So you've mentioned that a couple times. Where is this Southwest Coast Path? Where does it sort of start and finish?
I won't stop talking
about
it.
Was it really good?
Boring everyone to tears. It was incredible. I would highly recommend anyone to go and do a section of it. It is beautiful. So it stretches from Poole in Dorset on the south coast of England, and it goes for 630 miles right round to Minehead in Somerset. And I mean, it is really tough terrain. I don't think people expect it to be quite as hard as it is. It's very hilly, but it's just beautiful. Like every single day was just so many beautiful views, and yeah, it was really special.
What's it like waking up in the morning knowing that, like, this would be quite a enviable feeling that you're going through? Sort of, you wake up in the morning and you don't have to go to, a 9-to-5 job, or you don't have to battle with, the crowds of heading into to work. How does that sort of, how is that? Is that something that's sort of clear in your mind and you're aware of?
Yeah, definitely. And I keep trying to remind myself of that, because people often ask sort of, how do you get up and run day after day? But I think for me, I'm very, very aware that although obviously I do have to get up and run, and there are days that I probably can't be bothered, the alternative to that would be getting up, getting on a really busy train, going to work all day. And I just feel like I can't really complain about having to get up and run, because even if I have a really long, hard day's running, it isn't any longer than a long, hard day at work. And so, yeah, I am very aware of that. And it's something I try and remind myself of a lot. And I think it makes it a lot easier to then get your head around doing it. Because I think another thing that I think people imagine when they think about running 20, 25 miles a day, they're imagining fitting it in around their normal lives, which obviously would be extremely challenging. Whereas that is pretty much all I have to do every day. So you don't really have an excuse not to just get on with it.
And do you listen to music as you run, or audio books, or do you just run without music or anything?
So I listen to a lot of podcasts. I find they work really well. I do listen to music sometimes when I need a bit of a boost, but I find it just a bit distracting a lot of the time. And also there's only so many times you can listen to the same songs. So I really like listening to podcasts on all different subjects. And then I find if you've plugged in, you're really engaging in a podcast, then an hour later you've like, oh, an hour's gone and I've learned something amazing, listened to a really interesting story and had a run. So that works really well. And then some days I just don't listen to anything, but I think when I'm finding it hard, listening to a podcast really helps.
Now I just want to talk about the logistics of your feet, because going through winter, and it's the UK and I know it rains heaps.
Yeah.
Are your shoes, do you have like Gore-Tex shoes that sort of are somewhat waterproof, or are your feet, or have your feet just been wet constantly for day in, day out?
So over the winter, I ran in trail shoes. They weren't Gore-Tex, but they were ones that drained quite well. That was really important for me because as well as it raining a lot, even days it wasn't raining, it was so wet underfoot. It was really muddy. There were lots of puddles. So I was going kind of mid-calf into puddles every few steps. So it needed to be shoes that could drain quite well. So I did have wet feet a lot. I wore sealskins waterproof socks, but they helped, but they didn't stop the water. And the main thing was then often your shoes don't dry overnight, so you have to put wet shoes back on in the morning. So having wet feet all the time wasn't fun. But I think it's just a case of you've got to make sure as soon as you stop running, I dried my feet, I had dry socks, and I just didn't, you can't let your feet be wet all the time. And my feet actually survived. I haven't had any blisters yet, which is a bit miraculous. But having wet feet all the time, yeah, it's not fun, it's not pleasant, but it's just, you have to just put up with it really, I think.
What about toenails? Have you lost any?
No, actually, my friends have laughed at me for a really long time for having really small toenails, but I think it's really been to a benefit on this trip, because obviously you lose toenails when they sort of bang up against the end of your shoes, but because mine are so small, they don't get anywhere close to my shoes, so I've got all my toenails intact.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's actually surprising. So how far have you run so far? About 2,500 miles?
Yes, I think probably nearer to 3,000 now. I have to admit that, which I sort of regret, I did lose count quite quickly, because the first few days I was running with my Garmin on like I used to run normally. I'd always track my runs. But I found because you're going so far each day, mentally I find it now much easier not to track it, because I just hated having it on my wrist to look at all the time, sort of, this is how many miles I've done so far. And I find it much easier mentally to know I've got to go from A to B and I've just got to get there, and not be tracking it by every 0.1 of a mile. So as a result, it means I don't know exactly how far I've ran at the moment, but I think nearly 3,000 miles.
Just on the mental side of things, we'll get back into that. I just wanted to ask you as well around just with your gear. So particularly like if it's raining heavily and you're completely soaked, at the end of your run, at the end of the day, what do you do with your wet clothes and your muddy socks and shoes? Like where you've stopped for the night, do you try and get your gear washed and dried that night, or do you just try and hang it up and hope it dries a little bit before the next day? Or
yeah, well, the good thing about running kit is it does dry pretty quickly. So like I said, over the winter I didn't camp, which meant that every night I had somewhere indoors where you could sort of hang your stuff out. So even if I couldn't wash it and it was still pretty muddy and a bit stiff and not very nice, on the whole, my actual clothes did always dry overnight, which I think made a big difference. If I'd had to camp over the winter, because every single day of the winter I would arrive wherever I was going, plastered head to toe mud, soaked through, and I think if I'd had to camp, it would have all just been a lot more miserable. But I did, on the whole, manage to dry stuff off overnight, so it wasn't too bad.
And at night, when you stop running for the day. At night, do you have any sort of routines at all? Do you, I'm guessing by now your body's really conditioned and used to hours and hours of running week in, week out, month in, month out. Is that right? Has your body sort of become conditioned to what you've done so far, running thousands and thousands of miles?
Yeah, definitely. I think what's amazed me, and again, people did tell me this would happen before, but I don't think I quite believed them. But it's surprising. Like, your body really does get used to what you want it to do, and it will do what you ask it to. I think you have to be careful. So I make sure I sleep enough, and if I stay up too late, then I feel that the next day. So I make sure I sleep enough, eat enough, drink enough, and then if I'm really, really, really tired or my body just doesn't want to go, then I think it's just a case of listening to it and taking a rest day or having an easier day that day, or maybe walking a bit rather than running. You do have to listen to your body. But yeah, I've on the whole got used to what I'm doing, and I don't find I don't ache anymore. Like, my muscles don't ache. I do just feel tired if I've done too much.
And have you found your running technique with the backpack on become more and more refined over the last 6 months, 6.5 months of running?
So I think the good thing about starting off most on trails, and they were quite technical trails, is I think that really helped my running style in terms of taking quite small footsteps and where to land on my foot. And I've worked out, I mean, it's all been a bit of a case of trial and error, like I said, but I've really worked out if I run a certain way, then things hurt, and if I don't, so it's listening to your body again. But yeah, I've got used to the backpack now. But the backpack is probably the biggest challenge. Every now and again, someone will come and run with me and insist on carrying it. Without it, it really feels like I'm flying. It's amazing.
And do you do much running at night? I'm guessing at winter, when the sun goes down early, did you have to crack out your headlamp?
I did. I have used my headlamp a few times, but on the whole, I've tried really, really hard not to be running in the dark, because the terrain is either coast paths, which are so narrow and slippy, and I just wouldn't feel comfortable completely alone running on one in the dark, or you're on a country road where there are cars coming and it's a bit dangerous to be running on them. So I try really hard, especially over the winter. I just got up early, and now it's sort of light until about 9 o'clock, so I don't really need to be running in the dark. So I've avoided that as much as possible.
And have you had any close calls at all with cars or trucks or other bike riders, or sort of?
Not too bad. There have been, there are a couple of bits. For instance, when you first get into Scotland, in southern Scotland, the coastal road is a really busy A road. It doesn't have a path. And so, for instance, on that one, I took the decision to not take the most coastal route and come inland a little bit so that I could follow a quieter road, because for me, it's just not worth it, lorry dodging, and that's not what I set out to do. So I think it's just a case of being sensible. And if you've got to come half a mile inland and take a quieter road, then that's something I'm happy to do, really.
Now, I just want to ask about Wales. I know in Wales, they're very famous for having these towns that have got 30 letters in them, and, you just can't pronounce them.
Yeah.
Did you ever sort of were there many sort of towns that you just couldn't pronounce, and it was just, you just sort of remembered the first 6 or so letters in this 30-letter town?
Yeah, it was Wales was a nightmare, because I just couldn't pronounce anything. And even things that aren't really long, you think it's obvious how you say it, and you actually say it completely differently. So I spent most of Wales being laughed at by people for my terrible pronunciations. And for instance, a double L, you sort of say that like a cl, so like, I can't even do it. But if there was a double L, I'd just panic.
All right.
Try not to say it out
just
loud.
point. Just pointed on the map.
Yeah. It was a nightmare.
Now, I just wanted to ask about your motivation. What motivates you to continue moving forward?
So I think there's a combination of different things, and it's definitely something you get better at with practice. But if I really, really want to start running, first of all, I think about why I want to stop running. So if I'm genuinely something like my leg really hurts or I am just exhausted, then I do think, well, maybe I should just stop running a bit shorter today. Maybe I shouldn't push through on this one. If it's a case that I just can't really be bothered, I find it really helpful to think about what I would realistically be doing alternatively. So a bit like we were saying earlier, and I think, well, realistically, if I stopped running, I would just be at work or I'd be at home doing my laundry or something. I probably wouldn't be doing something really exciting. I wouldn't just be sitting down. So I find it really helpful to think about that quite realistically. And also, I think with any adventure, there should be the overriding fact that you actually enjoy doing it and you want to do it. And on the whole, there have been difficult days, but it's been a really positive experience and I'm really lucky to be able to do it. So I try and just concentrate on that, to be honest.
And has there ever been a moment so far that's been a real low point at all, where you've sort of really been in a real rut mentally and maybe physically, that, you know, you were really doubting yourself and didn't know whether you were, you know, whether you're sort of maybe contemplating on pulling the plug or anything like that? Can you maybe share a story or a moment when you were in a real low point?
Yeah, definitely. So what I found quite difficult mentally is from kind of maybe months 2 to 5, it wasn't the beginning anymore, but it also was nowhere near the end. And 10 months felt like a very long time. And I found that really difficult to deal with. And there was one particular moment. It was the beginning of March. So I've been going for 4 months. I had about 6 months to go. And I'd actually been back home for a couple of days. My grandma wrote a book and she was having a book launch. And I really wanted to be there. So I decided to take a couple of days off and actually go home. So I did that. And then I got the train back to Wales to where I needed to pick up the trail again. And all of a sudden, I don't really know what it was. It just felt impossible. And I cried on everyone in Wales. And I just really, really thought I didn't want to be doing this anymore. And I think it was probably because I'd been home and I'd seen my friends and family and all the things you're sort of missing. And I just thought, well, why am I putting myself through this? I could so easily just go home. No one, and I think that's the thing about adventure, no one actually cares if you do it or if you don't do it except for you. So it was really difficult. So and I was very close to quitting, but I came up with a rule which I've now stuck to the whole time, where if I'm having a real down moment and I want to quit, I have to wait another 2 weeks. And I think if at the end of that 2 weeks, every single day in the meantime has been as miserable and I've hated it as much, then I'm sort of allowed to pull the plug, because I don't want this to be a miserable experience. I want to enjoy it. But inevitably, and as happened in that case, in that 2 weeks, you have a really good day. The sun comes out and you meet someone amazing, you have a really good day's running, and then the cycle starts again. So I think it's just, I had to remember that it was only temporary, but it was definitely difficult. I was very close to quitting then.
On the other side of the coin, have there been moments where, you know, you might see something like, you know, you said you might see the sunset come up, or, you know, you might see something incredible in nature, or you might have some sort of inspiration that's sort of arisen somewhere. Have you had moments like that where you just are truly thankful that you're truly free?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it really says it all that when you ask that question, I can think of so many amazing moments. Whereas when you ask a question about being down, there's actually only 1 or 2 of those. So I think that really says it all. But there was one moment, it was early January, and I kind of injured my leg a little bit. It wasn't anything serious. I think it was just a bit of a strain. So I'd had a few days off to rest that, and I was getting a bit fidgety, and I really wanted to get running again. And then I finally went for a run. I was in South Cornwall, I think. And I was running along, and it was getting towards, and obviously it was getting dark at 4 o'clock at this point. So it was probably about 3:45, and I was about a mile away from where I was finishing for the day. And I came over this field, which was sort of on the cliff near the sea, and I just saw the sun starting to set and the sky had gone pink. And I just thought, this is amazing. I get to spend my day, I think it was a Tuesday, and I thought, instead of going to work or going home, I'm spending my day just on this cliff path running. And that was a real moment. I thought I am really, really lucky to be here.
Yeah, sometimes those moments, even though time-wise it might be literally a moment or two, often they make all the pain and the struggle and, all the hard work, it makes it worth it.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, do you ever sort of get into like the zone at all? Just when you're running, have you ever sort of entered that flow state where you're just immersed in what you're doing and next thing you know, 2-3 hours have passed?
I mean, not quite 2 or 3 hours, but I think, yeah, definitely. And you just have those days more where it all just works. And I found there are actually certain things I can do to increase the likelihood of those days happening. So I know that if I get up in the morning and I have breakfast and I get going and it's early, I'm much more likely to have a good day than the days where I sit around and put it off for a few hours. And obviously it really helps when the weather's nice, but yeah, sometimes the sun's shining and you're running along and hours pass and then suddenly it's mid-afternoon, you finish the run and I'm thinking, wow, I did it. And then obviously on the flip side, there's other days where every mile feels like a struggle, but I think it's working out the things you can do to increase the chance of having one of those great days, because there definitely are things you can do to help that.
And what about mental toughness? Do you need to be mentally tough to do what you're doing?
I don't know really, because people are lovely, but people keep saying that I am quite mentally tough, and I don't know if that's true. I think for me it was really, it sounds a bit corny, but it is just really focusing on not luck. I don't really like the term luck because I think you make your own luck, but just appreciating where you are and also focusing on the fact you wanted to be there. So obviously there are days when it's raining and it's cold and it's wet and I have a bit of a moan, but really I don't think I have much right to be moaning about it because I chose to be there, I chose to be doing it. So I think you just have to try and remain positive and actually enjoy it. And if you literally hate every second of it, then maybe think about if that's the right thing to be doing anyway. So I think you do have to be a bit determined and a bit stubborn, but for me just being positive works really well.
And what about goal setting? How was setting goals for you? Can you maybe shed some light on that? How important is goal setting?
So I think what I've actually learned a lot over this journey is the importance of just chipping away at something slowly and the cumulative effect of those small efforts. So on a day-to-day basis, I'm running kind of 15, 20, 25 miles. And obviously that is a long way to run, but I've started to now really see clearly that if you add all those 15, 20, 25 miles up, then eventually you get to 1,000 miles, 2,000 miles, 3,000 miles, and you have something to be really proud of. So I think that's something I definitely will be able to apply to normal life a lot more as well. So setting a goal, but not getting frustrated when one day in you haven't achieved it, because it is just small efforts that build up and sort of create something great.
With the distance that you've covered so far, you've been running for 6.5 months roughly. What's been the biggest lesson that you've learnt about yourself?
Oh, I don't know. I think a combination of things. I think, like I said, I think I've learnt that I can keep going at something, which I think I doubted my ability to do that before, but I think I've learnt that I can keep going. I think in terms of my personal motivations, I've realised that I do need something to look forward to on a daily basis. So whether that is just knowing there's a nice cake shop at the end of the day, or that you're going to meet someone really nice, or just thinking about a warm pair of socks you'll put on, I've learned I can't just get through. I think some people actually really like the suffering of a journey. I'm not that person. If it's hard, I have to think about when I won't be suffering anymore.
And is there any cakes that stick out in your mind that, like on certain towns or villages that you've gone through that, oh, geez, that was a nice cake that I had there?
Oh, look, so many more cakes. We could do a whole podcast on the cakes I've eaten. But there was a chocolate Guinness cake in Rye that was really delicious. But my best cakes have been ones that, because people have come to run with me and sort of brought chocolate brownies, and they're always a nice surprise. So there has been a lot of cake. Cool.
I try and ask everyone sort of these questions, but I wanted to find out from you, who's the first person that comes to mind when you hear the word successful, and why?
Oh, that is a tricky question, isn't it? Um, I'm really not sure on this particular person. I think so. I'm going to cheat a bit and divert slightly on this question, but I think for me, just in terms of being successful in general, I think it's when people are doing something and they're clearly just really enjoying what they're doing. So I don't know if you've heard of Danny Bent. He runs the Project Awesome movement in London, but his sort of motto is to be you as hard as you can possibly be you. And I think that's amazing. I think that's so true. If you're trying to be someone else, then that's not going to work. And there's actually a group in London called the Yes Tribe, and it's run by Dave Cornthwaite. And I started going camping with them last year. And I think the whole Yes Tribe for me sort of embodies this idea of success, because it's people just going out there and trying to do the things that they're really passionate about. And they're probably not driven by money or sort of traditional success, but just doing those things that really sort of make your heart sing. And I think for me, that's success.
What have you sort of learnt about people in general that you've met on your journey, on this run?
That they're amazing. People are amazing. They're so kind. I haven't met a single person who hasn't just been really, really kind. And I think what I found difficult at the beginning was people would offer help or want to help you, and I would almost say no because I didn't think they wanted to be helping. But what I've learned is that people only offer to do things they want to do and that they're comfortable doing, and people want to help other people. So I think be open to other people and accept the help they're offering. Obviously, in some roundabout way, you have to offer that back at some point, not necessarily to the same person, but just kind of in a cycle of kindness. But yeah, people are amazing and really helpful.
Just on advice, if you could make a phone call to, normally I sort of ask for making a phone call to the 20-year-old Elise, but let's just say if you could make a phone call to the 18-year-old Elise and give her some advice, what would you tell her?
I think I would tell her to have a bit more faith that it will all work out. Because when I was 18, I mean, it wasn't that long ago, but I really didn't have a clue what I would do, and I wasn't very confident. And I think just having faith that if you just sort of pursue the things you're actually interested in and just go along with it, then things do work out in the end. And also just to really not care about what other people think, because what I've found is people actually don't really care about what other people are doing. Nobody really, and in the nicest way, nobody really cares except you, what you're doing. So I think just get rid of other people's opinions and have some more faith.
What advice would you have to the listener out there that is, whether it's a guy or a girl who's possibly wanting to embark on their own adventure? It may not be doing a lap of Great Britain, but it might be doing something else that is sort of beyond what they, beyond themselves. What sort of advice would you have for someone that's wanting to embark on a particular adventure of self-discovery?
I think the main thing I would say is that doing something I found is a lot less scary than thinking about doing it. So in the couple of weeks leading up to going running, I was petrified, and I really thought I was making a bit of a mistake because I quite enjoyed my job in London. I was enjoying my life, and I thought, am I making a huge mistake going and doing this? But I found it's so much less scary just doing something, because then all the things you're worrying about, if they actually happen, you can overcome them and do something about it. But it's these imaginary problems that you can't do anything about. So I think if you want to do something, just do it. Find a way to make it happen.
Now, I just got a couple quick fire questions for you. If you could recommend one book on any topic, what would that be?
So this is such a cliche, but I would definitely say Born to Run by, is it Chris McDougall?
McDougall, yeah.
I read that over Christmas, and Anna McNuff, who ran the Lake to New Zealand, she told me before I set off on this run to read it, and I didn't. And then once I'd read it, it made me so much more motivated to just get out there and run. So that's the one that springs to mind. Yeah, no,
that's a good one, that one.
Really good book.
Do you have a favourite documentary or movie?
I've got to admit, I'm not very good at watching films. I might have to pass on this question. I don't really have a favourite film, and I do watch a lot of documentaries, but none spring out, to be honest.
Favourite food?
Fruit cake.
What sort of cake?
I also really like avocados.
Yeah, cool.
So cake and avocados on two ends of the spectrum.
Okay. Any particular type of cake that what you like?
I'm a big fan of Victoria sponge with lots of fruit and cream.
Yeah, cool. And whereabouts can people find you online? Where can they follow your progress and reach out to you and just track you and say hi? Where's the best place?
So I've got all the usual social media channels. So my Twitter is Elise C. Downing. My Facebook page is Elise Downing Run the Coast. And then my website and blog is just elisedowning.com.
Yeah, cool. I'll put a link to all those in the show notes. So I just wanted to thank you again for coming on to the podcast. You're in Girvan, is that right, at the moment?
Yes.
So that's not far from
correct.
Glasgow.
Yeah, so just south of Glasgow.
And what are you estimating? How long till you? Where's the finish? Is the finish back in London or?
Yeah, so the finish is back in Greenwich in London. I should finish at the end of August, so it's about 3.5 months to go. So I've just got to go up the Highlands to John O'Groats, which is the most northerly point of the UK, and then back down the East Coast, which is a lot easier than the West Coast because it's a lot straighter. There's a lot less wiggles, and it's also flatter. And then back to London.
Yeah, no, that'd be really good. Good luck with the rest of your adventure. I'll definitely be following you and cheering you on from Australia.
Oh, thank you very much.
Don't give up. Just keep moving forward. And there's heaps of people online that are following your progress. And thanks again for your time and good luck with the rest of your adventure.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It was really fun to chat.
No worries. Thanks a lot.
You've just been listening to the Born to Kick Arse podcast at borntoKickArse.com. If you liked what you heard and want more, please subscribe on iTunes. Give a 5-star rating and a Kick Arse review. This really helps to boost our presence and continues to allow us to introduce you to the most fascinating people on the planet. Welcome aboard and catch you next time.